Question 3 says when you release an inflated but untied balloon, why does it fly across the room? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the question in front of you?
Can you share the screen with me? Oh, I can bring it up. It's question 3, right?
Yep. All right. So let's practice trying to answer this. So can you try and give me your answer first? What do you think is your answer?
Let me find that question.
No, the question is already on the screen.
No, I couldn't see it.
Uh,
Oh yeah. Oh, sorry. You typed it out. Okay. So inflated, but you time. Why does it fly? Because like the gas will comes out from the bottom of it.
so your answer is because the gas comes out from the bottom.
Which pushes the balloon to like the opposite way, and will it gas?
That's your answer?
Yeah.
So you kind of need to work on how you, like, as you know, you need to work on how you answer your written response questions. So this, you maybe sort of have the right idea. Like it's not, your idea is not wrong, but you haven't really expressed it in any way nice. So it doesn't sound like a good answer, even though your basic idea might be right.
Yeah.
And also you have not really you have not really specified how you're thinking about it. Not really. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So, and you haven't really tied in any laws. You just go, because the gas comes out of the balloon, which pushes the balloon the opposite way. Why would it push it the opposite way? You know what I mean? Like you haven't really justified anything.
Okay.
In other words, you would at most get 1 mark.
Okay.
If this is a 3-mark question, at most you get 1 mark. It might be a 2-mark question, but if it's any more than a 1-mark question, I don't think you could be getting any more than 1 mark.
Okay.
Even if because while you get the mark because your basic idea is sort of right, but you haven't put it in a way that sounds nice. Like you haven't used correct words, as in like, are you talking about force? Are you talking about momentum? Are you talking about energy? Like what are you talking about, right? You haven't, used laws. You haven't referred to the law. So if you are talking about push, so push really means force. So you really want to, if you're in that way, you really refer to force. But if you're going to talk about force, why is it the other way? And that means you need to talk about reaction force, which means Newton's third law. You know what I mean? Like you didn't really say any of that.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So there is more than one way to answer the question, but because this is in the momentum section, I'm going to use momentum to do it.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
So firstly, do you see what's wrong, like how you can improve your answer?
I can talk about Newton's third law.
Yeah. So if we're trying to improve your answer, you want to, I mean, we'll do it bit by bit. But if you're trying to do it your way, you want to bring in laws.
Yeah.
E.g., in your case, Newton's third law. So instead of just going, so it pushes across the balloon in the opposite way, you might say, then according to Newton's third law, there will be a force that is the opposite direction, or something like this, right?
Yeah.
Use specific but relevant terms, e.g., momentum, or force, or energy, etc. Like you haven't used any of the, like you said, just push, which means you mean force, but you haven't really come out and said force.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? And because it's a physics, like you're doing physics, right? You should be specific about the physics concept, both the law and the concept, right?
Mhm.
And you should also like, you know, like try to structure your answer. Like, you know, sort of like a because, therefore kind of thing. Like
Uh-huh.
this is more English now, right? But this is more like building your argument, your logic. This is more so the first two are sort of more specific things that is probably easy for you to do. But then to make your answer even better, then it's just talking about how to. It's really an English question, if you know what I mean.
Okay. Yeah.
You're starting to talk about how to debate and how to, you know, which is important. But I'm just saying that's less physics and more how you communicate.
Okay. Yeah.
So because this is a sort of momentum um, question in the momentum chapter, I'm going to use momentum to do it. It's not the only way, but it's probably the, you know, most straightforward way. Okay.
Yeah.
So what relevant law do you think is applicable if I'm talking about momentum?
Conservation.
Exactly. And the specific term, of course, is momentum, maybe impulse, if I want to talk about impulse, and then I'm going to structure it. So I might say something like, you know, so I might say something along these lines, right? So kind of, you know, you said the bottom, and I'm basically saying, you know, firstly, I'm talking about what happens. When you release the balloon, the gas inside the balloon is, you know, released from the open end, right?
Uh-huh.
So it is exiting the balloon at a certain velocity, right?
Yeah.
This means the gas has momentum in the direction of the exit. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
However, momentum must be conserved according, you know, you could probably, you know, rewrite it this way: by the law of conservation of momentum, momentum must be conserved. So the momentum of the balloon must be in the opposite direction. This therefore means the balloon must move in the opposite direction to the gas and therefore flies across the room. Right? And do you see how my answer, you might think it's a bit long and we can talk about, you know, cutting it down a bit, but can you see how I talk specifically about what happens to start with? So, you know, the question says when you release. So I'm saying what happens when you release. And I'm also saying what happens, the question says, why does it fly? I end with why it flies.
Okay.
Like
Yep.
I've given, you know, they said, why does it go from A to B? So I've started at A and gone all the way to B.
Okay.
Whereas you know, your answer just doesn't, like, you just go because, like, what because? Like gas comes out of, like, you know what I mean? There's no, it doesn't read complete.
Okay.
I mean, we have to fill in the gaps for you, but we shouldn't be filling in the gaps for you. You should be giving us a complete answer.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, obviously, this is the start and this is the end. But obviously, you need to explain because it's, you know, they're asking you a why, right? So I need to explain why. And that's all the stuff in between, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the stuff in between, can you see I specifically mentioned momentum and I specifically mentioned law of conservation of momentum.
Yes.
And I explained how they apply here.
Yeah.
Do you see the difference?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions with that?
Nope.
All right. Now you could answer this question using, you know, action reaction using Newton's third law, but that would be a slightly even longer answer if you want to make it complete. because of the fact that you have to talk about force. So you need to talk about how the force exerted by the balloon on the gas is downward, and therefore the gas exerts a force upward on the balloon. And I just, want to kind of avoid that level of detail.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Let's pick another question. All right. Let's take a look at question 4.
Yeah.
So basically, the short version is, let me reword the question, but a man is stranded in the middle of a frictionless ice rink. What could he do to reach the edge? And so question 4 is very similar. I reworded a bit. So basically, you've got a man who's kind of stuck in the middle of an ice skating rink and the ice is frictionless. So he can't, he's trying to sort of, I guess, get off the ice rink, but,
Yeah.
there's no friction. So he can't really, so is there anything he can do to kind of get to the edge and out of, not be stuck in the middle anymore?
Like for this question, it says stranded. Like if it's frictionless, how he can be stranded there?
Well, maybe someone dropped him in.
I mean, when you're talking about like the ice rink, like is it like ice hole, something like that? Or
No, it's just a layer of ice.
okay.
So it's just like if you've got a flat piece of ice, right?
Mhm.
But it's very hard to get off because you can't walk off because you can't, every time you try to walk, you just stay in the same position, right?
Oh, okay, got it. But wouldn't he like just start sliding?
He would if there was any sort of gravity, like if there was any slope, he definitely would. But let's assume there is no slope at all. But you're right. If there was a slope, he would just slide out. Correct.
Mhm.
But let's say there is no slope whatsoever.
And there's no other equipment, just himself.
Well, he's himself, but you assume he's, he was ice skating or something, right? So he's, whatever. He's got his stuff with him.
Okay. And like, can he just use his hands to push the ice? Yeah.
Well, that won't work, right? Because there's no friction. So you can't push the ice because if you push the ice, there's no friction. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Not pretty sure about this one.
So you have to use momentum. So
Yeah.
basically, to escape from the middle of the frictionless ice rink, the man could. So firstly, when you talk about an answer question like this, right? Firstly, answer the question and say, what could he do? Could have thrown something such as his shoe in the opposite direction he wants to travel.
Okay.
So firstly, answer what he could do. And then depending on how, I mean, the question only asks for what he could do. So technically we've answered the question. But let's say, it also says explain why, or in general, you'll need to explain why, right?
Mhm.
And so this is again where we kind of explain it a bit. So this is due to the law of conservation of momentum.
Yeah.
Which states that the sum of the momentum of the system must be conserved. before and after a collision or explosion. By throwing his shoe one way, e.g. left, the shoe will have leftward momentum, which means he must have rightward momentum to conserve total momentum. This will result in him moving on a frictionless surface and, you know,
Yep.
and therefore escape the ice rink.
Okay. Cool.
So that's one way you might do that.
Uh-huh.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right. So let's do a sort of I'm going to just more or less try similar questions to one that your teacher might give you as well. I might be rewording things a bit, but basically the questions will be very similar. So, you know, explain and I mean, all right. So let me try and sort of direct it a bit more. So questions may or may not give you these hints, right?
Yes.
But let's say I'm going to specifically say in terms of impulse, explain in terms of impulse the value of, you know, airbags or safety belts. I mean, it's really in preventing injuries in a car crash. So if I say, you know, the in terms of impulse might not be given to you in a question, all right? This is a hint.
Yeah.
So the question might not have that. Or, you know, if the question didn't have that, it might say explain how airbags, you might, you know, I mean, it could be reworded all sorts of ways, right? It could say explain how airbags prevent injuries in a car crash or reduce injuries or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Now, I've given you a hint to say do it in terms of impulse. So can you give me an answer? Try and, you know, I want you to give me an answer because then I can tell you what, you know, what needs to be improved about it, if anything. So don't worry if it's like wrong or anything, but I do want you to try and give me an answer because I mean, I can tell you how I would do it, and that helps you in some way, but I think what really helps you the most, although it takes time, is for you to give me an answer. I can tell you what's good and what's bad about it, and then, you know, we can, you know, improve on that.
Okay. So impulse equals to force times time.
So basically, I'm for the moment just going to type out what I think you mean when you say whatever you say, whether it's right or wrong. And basically, when you're happy with, like, when you're more or less happy with what you've got on the screen as your answer, let me know. So currently, your answer reads as impulse equals force times time. If you tell me to remove it, I'll remove it. Like, you know, just I want to know what your answer would look like.
Okay. Should I say like it's very valuable at first, or
Can you say what?
like because the question said that explain the value of airbags. Like, do I have to say it's valuable or it's not that valuable?
All right, let me reword the question. All right, so just explain how, I suppose.
Yeah, because in history, like when we have questions like that, ask you the value, we have to
Like, yeah. So you should, and then you will probably say in that sense, you know, airbags are quite valuable if blah blah blah. But, you know, let's just simplify it a bit. Explain how airbags and safety belts, like, you know, maybe we can say are designed to,
Okay.
because, you know, obviously there are situations like if we're getting sort of and I know you do engineering, right? So like, you know, the way they're designed and the way they actually work might be different as well. So they might be designed to prevent injuries, but at the same time, they might increase injuries. So I don't know if you know this, but for example, airbags, if you use them, if they get deployed, in other words, they go off and someone's not wearing a seatbelt, that could make injuries worse
Yeah.
because of the position and blah, blah, blah. So I'm not going to go into those details. That's not the point of this question. So maybe if I reword it this way, it makes it a bit easier for you. But you're right. If it says explain the value, you should explain the value. But that then starts talking about, you know, in terms of the way you're thinking, then you start talking about cost. What if this happens? What if that happens? So just explain how airbags or safety belts, same thing really here, are designed to prevent injuries in a car crash, and do it in terms of physics, specifically in terms of impulse.
Okay. So like you can write it as mass times velocity. So which means the lower you are, like the momentum like exerting on you will be less. During a car crash, actually what I think is like put is like the is the end of the sentence, and like another sentence starts with during the car crash. During a car crash, safety belts can like, can I say slow you down, something like that, which means it like decreases you, which means it decelerates you. So there will be less momentum like acting on you. Which can prevent injuries. I think that's what I got.
All right. So this is your answer?
Yes.
All right. Done? You can say yes. I just want to make sure that I've written down faithfully what you want.
In a car crash, like after injuries.
Sorry?
Maybe put in a car crash after injuries. Yeah, I think that's what I saw. Yeah.
All right. So I understand that you've, put in a lot of effort here, but no. And but I will also tell you that there are quite a few things we need to change. And it kind of like, so first let's talk about the good things, all right?
Mhm.
I can see that because you were trying to go from A to B, you tried to bring in impulse, and you should, because I've directed you to do so. You've mentioned seatbelts. You haven't really mentioned airbags, but I don't really care because, I said airbags or seatbelts. I'm really doing that because both are the same. So if the question was on airbags, you can say the same for airbags. If the question was on seatbelts, you can do seatbelts. So I'm going to just treat it for your case as a seatbelt question because you went with seatbelts and not airbags. That's fine. All right. So I'm basically saying you answered the question. You didn't just say safety devices. You specified what it was. And you decided that you were trying to implement what I said earlier about explaining this. That's why you decided to add in a car crash, right? All right. So that's the sort of good things that you've sort of done there. All right. But there's lots of problems with your answer, like a lot of problems. Okay. And here's the thing. Let's break it down step by step. Firstly, impulse equals force times time. That is definitely accurate. And you said it goes mass times velocity. Is it really mass times velocity? Because mass times velocity is momentum, right?
Oh yeah, true. Yeah.
So what should it actually be?
So m times a times t.
Yep. It is m times a times t. But if you wanted to use this, then you really need to say it's change in velocity.
Changing velocity.
That will be important
Okay.
for impulse, because impulse is the change in momentum. So you can't say it's mass times velocity when velocity, if you don't say change in velocity, then that would be wrong. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
Now that then, see, you then start saying, which means the slower you are, the momentum exerted on you is less. Now, this statement that I'm underlining in blue here,
Mm-hmm.
Firstly, I'll probably reword it to say the lower the momentum, like just the way it's worded is a bit, could be made better. But more importantly, this sentence, firstly, is it true or false?
False.
It's actually true, right? Don't just say false because, the
Okay.
slower you are, the moment exerted on you is less. Like when you stop, right?
Mm-hmm.
If to bring you to a stop. Like
Yeah.
he didn't add that, but if we assume that you're talking about to bring you to a stop, then yes, it's true that the moment exerted on you is less. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying that the slower you are, if you need to be brought to a stop, then the momentum exerted on you is less. That's true. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason why I'm saying this is a problem is because this is just saying drive slower. If you drive slower, you won't get as bad injuries, which is perfectly true, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's that got to do with seatbelts?
Okay.
Seatbelts are there to help you regardless of the speed at which you crash. Now, obviously, might be speeds where they're more effective and there's speeds where they're less effective, but this doesn't explain seatbelts at all.
Okay.
So this part is true but irrelevant to the question.
Mm-hmm.
It's irrelevant to the question. If the question's saying, explain why, people who die, people who are in high-speed crashes have worse injuries than people who have, crash at lower speeds, then this might be useful.
Mm-hmm.
But this phrase, once you reword it to keep your idea to make a bit better, is true but pointless for this question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm getting at here?
Yeah.
Okay, so now you're talking about during a car crash. Okay, yep. And that's what we're meant to be talking about during a car crash. Seatbelt can slow you down. Yes, they do. Which means it decelerates you, which it does. But why does decelerating you mean there's less momentum acting on you?
Mm. I mean,
I mean, if you're traveling at 60 kilometers, what's momentum?
momentum
It's mass times velocity, right? Does your mass change?
shouldn't, like, if the velocity is like slower, shouldn't.
Yeah. But the question is, momentum is mass times velocity, right?
Yes.
Does your mass change?
No.
Now, at the start, before the crash, what speed are you traveling at?
Um.
Pick one, I don't care.
30.
Okay, you're traveling 30 kilometers per hour. That's before the crash, right?
Yes.
After the crash, what's your velocity at the very end?
0.
0. Does that, whether or not you're wearing seatbelts, your change in momentum is the same. You're changing from 30 to 0.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't make a difference. This is not logical because the change in velocity is the same, whether you wear seatbelts or not.
Mm-hmm.
If you wear a seatbelt, you're still going from 30 to 0. If you wear a seatbelt, you're still going from 30 to 0.
Yeah.
So can you see why your answer here, I know you've put in effort, but can you see why you're going to get very close to 0 for this one? Because you say a lot of wrong things. You know what I mean?
Yes.
All right. But I can see you're trying to do it, and I get that. But this is why I want you to do the question answer, not because I want to rip you apart, but just because like you need to see why your answers are lacking, right? Because you will often think that you do answers that are similar to ones that like mine, perhaps. Like you'll go, I did this, I did that. But can you see why it's you're not answering the question?
Yeah.
All right. So I will say impulse is defined as change in momentum, which, assuming you are brought to rest, will be the same value for a crash at the same velocity. So I'm basically saying for you, which, for a person who with the same mass traveling at the same speed, once they crash and are brought to 0, the change in momentum is the same. Right? Agree with that?
Yeah.
Now, impulse can also be represented as force times time. Since impulse is constant, if time can be increased, force will be decreased. This is the primary purpose of an airbag or seatbelt, to increase the time of so the purpose of the seatbelt is to increase the time of the collision. So to increase the time taken to slow you down to a complete stop, which therefore lowers the maximum force you experience, and therefore reduces your risk of injury.
Okay.
Do you see the difference?
Yeah.
Like, can you see how your answer really does not, like, it said something right but irrelevant, and it also said things that were not logical and wrong. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Whereas this, first we say what it is. Impulse is changing momentum, and assuming you're traveling at the same speed and same mass, that means your changing momentum is the same. So impulse is a constant, and therefore using this force times time over here, if time goes up, force goes down because impulse is constant.
Okay.
So if time goes up, force will go down, and that is what the airbag and seatbelt does. It gives, instead of you having a because the seatbelt will slow you down while you're moving forward, it will start moving that back. Whereas if you didn't have the seatbelt, it's the steering wheel that will slow you down, and you've already hit the steering wheel.
Okay.
But a seatbelt, think of it like a seatbelt is kind of like a rubber band, not as stretchy as a rubber band, but it's that idea. When you start going forward, it starts pulling you back. And it stretches slightly. Obviously, it can't stretch too much, otherwise you just go straight forward. But it stretches enough such that it might still hurt you, but not as much as if it wasn't there.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Good.